And how much time would you say you spend a week on reviewing the latest research and the latest knowledge in your field of expertise as it relates to your job as the editor?
The editor-in-chief job consumes about 50 to 60 hours every week, including just these recent weeks that I've been preparing for this. So it consumes an enormous amount of time.
And in this review process of these submitted manuscripts, does this give you a very broad overview and informed knowledge of the current state of your practice of medicine?
I think so. We get papers from all over the world. We get papers from literally every country. And so we have some insight into what is happening, not just in the United States, but internationally. We see very much cutting-edge research where the trends are going. And we also find out about sort of the unusual cases, things that nobody ever thought might happen, and they'll send it. So the exposure is pretty broad.
Do you serve on any other editorial boards in addition to your work with anesthesia and analgesia?
I'm currently an editor on the editorial board of the British Journal of Anesthesia, and I'm an editor on the Journal of Anesthesia, which is a Japanese journal.
In the past, have you served on other editorial boards in this regard?
Yes. I've been on the pardon me. I've been on the editorial board of Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics. I've been on the editorial board of the Journal of Pharmacokinetics and Biopharmaceutics. I've been on the I have to look at my CV. But the answer is yes.
All right.
Sorry.
Dr. Shafer, could you describe your education that led you into this field?
That led me into this field would actually start with my pediatrician when I was about 9 years old. But the formal education, which you're asking for.
Please.
I was an undergraduate at Princeton University, and I graduated from Princeton University in 1978. I then went from Princeton to Stanford University for my MD degree. Graduated from Stanford in 1983.
I'm sorry, what was your degree from Princeton?
Biology, an AB degree, ours baccalaureate.
Okay, and then you were a medical student at Stanford University?
Correct.
And when did you graduate from
1983.
Okay.
Then from Stanford, I went to University of Pennsylvania for my training in anesthesiology. That was completed in 1986. I then returned to Stanford in 1986 for a fellowship in clinical pharmacology with Don Stansky, which ran from 1986 through 1987, and then an intermediate year from 1987 to 1988. Also with Don Stansky.
Thank you. Defense counsel had indicated in their opening statement to the jury that you were a student of Dr. White's, Dr. Paul White. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
You obviously know Dr.
Yes.
White and have worked with him in a
Oh, yes,
professional...
and my first wife, Audrey Shafer, was his fellow when I was a fellow with Don Stansky. So Audrey was Paul's fellow, and I was Don Stansky's fellow.
And how long have you known Dr. White? And by the way, this is a gentleman seated here behind me in court.
Yes. I've known Dr. White since, I believe, 1981. My first wife, Audrey Shafer, actually did a research year with Dr. White at the end of medical school. And so during that research year, I got to know Dr. White and his family and his children. And Dr. White and I have remained friends and colleagues ever since.
Now, you're familiar with the current dosing guidelines for propofol sedation?
Yes.
And did you, in fact, have a direct role in establishing or those current dosing guidelines for propofol sedation?
Absolutely.
And can you describe that, please?
In 1991, AstraZeneca, which at the time was called ICI Pharmaceuticals.
Could you spell that, please?
I'm sorry, AstraZeneca is ASTRAZENECA, Zeneca. And that is the drug company that manufactures propofol. They wanted to get an indication, which means they wanted to get permission from the Food and Drug Administration to make propofol available for sedation. The FDA had had a very bad experience when a drug called midazolam was brought forward for sedation because the dosing guidelines were wrong and there were a lot of complications when midazolam was introduced for sedation. So the FDA was not anxious to repeat that experience for propofol.
When was that situation?
That situation about 1986 to about 1990.
Okay, and that was remedied as far as the midazolam?
As far as midazolam, that was remedied, yes.
Okay.
But because of that experience, the FDA was very concerned that they get this right, that the dosing guidelines be exactly correct. AstraZeneca had done a series of studies showing that propofol could be used for sedation, but the FDA said, well, what's the exact dose? And they said, well, we really can't tell from our studies. They said, well, I'm going too fast, I'm sorry.
Well, and we're passing out a tissue. Gesundheit. Just a moment. I want to make sure. Again, we're going to try to slow up things a tad.
All right.
So, the FDA... The
FDA back here.
The FDA was seeking to determine the proper dosage levels.
That is correct. And they had specific questions. One question was, what is the infusion rate of propofol to avoid complications?
And what do you mean by infusion rate?
So an infusion means that when you maintain a drug effect with a drug like propofol, it has to drip in so that every moment there's a little bit more drug going in. And the reason is because there's constantly drug being removed by the liver. So you have to have drug going in because drug is being removed by the liver. And that's what an infusion does. But AstraZeneca's reply was, we've tried various rates. And the FDA said, no, we don't want various rates. We want to know the rate. What's the best, safest rate? The other question was, how do you start sedation? Because if you start sedation too quickly, you can put your patient on a trajectory to toxicity. And so you don't want to start sedation too quickly because of the trajectory towards toxicity that you might embark on. So they said, well, how long do you wait? And AstraZeneca did not have data, so I did the analysis for that as well. So I did the analysis for the infusion rate, I did the analysis for the initiation of sedation, and they also said, what is a safe dose? I'm sorry. Wait, go back to where?
Dose.
I did the analysis for the infusion rate, thank you. And the analysis for the dose that would be given to start sedation.
And you designed this, I guess, dose?
Absolutely. It was all done with mathematical models based upon the data that they had. These models are all based on data. The other questions came up were things like, what is the reduction in elderly patients? The experience that the FDA had with midazolam is that many of the complications were in the elderly who would get a dose of midazolam and basically stop breathing. And they said, we want to know how much to reduce the dose. That had not been specifically addressed. So I did the analysis of the reduction in the elderly. So I was involved in almost all of the numbers that appear in the package insert for sedation are numbers that are derived from modeling that I did back in 1991.
I have a copy of an actual package insert as well as the same document, but in a bit larger text. At this time, I'd ask that the actual package insert document, which is a 4-page document, be marked People's Next. I believe it's 211.
It is.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Dr. Shafer, showing you what was just marked People's 211. Let me, do you recognize this first page of this document?
Absolutely.
And is this a package insert for propofol that would be contained within every package of propofol?
That is correct.
Yes?
Yes.
And can you just tell us, what is Diprivan as it relates to the word propofol? What do those two different words mean?
For drugs that are brought to market, there are usually two names. One name is a chemical name, and no matter who makes the drug, the chemical name is the same so that doctors actually know what they're giving. And in this case, the chemical name is propofol. The other name is a trade name. The company was allowed to come up with their own name, as long as the name is not misleading in some fashion, and that's the name that they sell the drug. So in this case, the name is Diprivan. I would just say it's a little teeny bit different because Diprivan is actually propofol and something called an emulsion. It's the white stuff. It's actually fat. And the emulsions actually can differ a little bit. So in the case of propofol, it is important to specify the manufacturer's name because they may have mixed it with a slightly different fat solution.
Thank you.